Welcome to another edition of Church and State with Brian McCall and Christopher Ferrara. It's nice to see you again, Chris, in the beginning of Lent.
The beginning of Lent in the middle of a war over Ukraine.
Yes. So today,
Lenten development.
Yes, war is a punishment for sin. That's true. So, but we're going to begin with the church and talk about some developments there. We've talked in prior episodes about the dictator pope's attempt to ban the traditional mass throughout the church. But then we had this interesting story in the past couple of weeks. The Priesthood Fraternity of St. Peter, a group that has been around for decades now, offering exclusively the traditional mass, had a couple people go visit Pope Francis. And then they revealed that after the meeting, he apparently said, this whole thing doesn't apply to you, don't worry, and then wrote out a little decree. And I gave it to the Priesthood Fraternity of St. Peter saying, oh, don't worry, that doesn't apply to you. I don't know about you, but do you find this whole way this happened a little just strange? Or does it fit in with Francis?
I think it fits in with Francis. I think that if you approach him on a personal level and you get him at the right moment, schmooze him, as we say in American parlance, that he'll give you something that you're asking for just on an interpersonal basis. So it doesn't surprise me. And, when you think about it, was he really going to try to shut down the priestly fraternity and the Society of St. Pius X, to which he's already given all kinds of concessions? They have universal faculties to hear confessions. They can celebrate weddings with the usual delegation from the local ordinary. So they're pretty much already regularized. So why not the fraternity as well? It doesn't surprise me at all. I'd like to see a signature on it. I'd like to see the Vatican affirming that this was granted in private audience. But that doesn't surprise me. I think that's just the way he is. So John Rao told me once that someone was involved, a witness to discussions he had about the Society of St. Pius X and his good disposition toward them. And he said something along the lines, I like them. They do something.
Well, it's interesting. On that note, I once talking to Bishop Fillet of the Society of St. Pius X, asked him, how do you understand him? How do you understand him? And he said, well, you have to understand his only principle is he doesn't actually have any principles. When it comes to doctrine or dogma, it is, as you say, in a many sense, personal. He kind of takes a liking or a disliking to certain practices or people, and yet he kind of had this liking. I've heard similar stories as Dr. Rao, gave to you that, I like those guys. They're out doing things. They're, they're busy. Oh, that's nice. Well, people are mean to them. Well, let me do something nice. Even though what they do and condemn is pretty much everything he seems to stand for. But again, if he's going to be that nice to them, why not the Fraternity of St. Peter as well? And maybe our mistake is...
He's not known for consistency. He had a reputation for being maddeningly inconsistent, even though he isn't consistent in terms of his dealings with people, there is a drift, and it's always in the same direction, which is a modernist direction. I mean, he has been anything but a bastion of orthodoxy. The things that he said that seem to contradict the faith or explicitly do contradict it would fill a book. Just go to Denzinger Bergoglio online. It's a website dedicated to his many sayings, which seem to be contrary to plain orthodoxy. But, in spite of his drift to the modernist left, if you want to put it in political terms, there are these considerations that he gives. So, I'm not surprised. And I think maybe it's a little bit of a miracle. I think it happened at the conclusion of the novena. Yeah. And we can't forget, this is really not a political struggle. We're not a political party. Right. Traditionalists are not a political party vying for political supremacy or engaging in political tactics. The Holy Ghost is involved in all of this. The traditional liturgy is a work of the Holy Ghost. It dates back in its canon to the apostolic times. It's not something that a pope can dispense with. The Holy Ghost will not permit it. So that's the ace in the hole, or the wild card, if you want to put it that way, which is that the church is ultimately an operation of the Holy Ghost. We are human instruments. We have to do what we're supposed to do. What our nations call upon us to do. But no human being, not even a pope, can alter the Holy Ghost's plan for the triumph of the church militant.
No, very true. And like you said, this may be a bit of a miracle. Although many things we're saying about this seems to be just sort of a personal personal act of the Pope. And I noticed, and this is, again, there's a Latin and an English version that have been made available through the Priestly Fraternity of St. Peter. And if you look at the end of it, it's kind of a little odd. So he basically says, you're fine. Traditionis Custodes doesn't apply to you. You have your own churches, your own oratories. You can do this. Then he says, without prejudice to what has been said above, the Holy Father suggests that as far as possible, the provisions of the motu proprio Traditionis Custodes be taken into account as well. Now, again, when I read that, I thought, obviously somebody that involved with law or writing a real rule or decree wouldn't say something like that. It's just sort of a nonsensical, like, here, I'm dispensing you from anything to do with this law, but hey, you might think about it. And, we suggest that you maybe think about doing what you can. I mean,
the law says about that is precatory language.
Well, yes.
Merely precatory. I pray that you consider this, but it has no binding effect. So this decree, it was translated into Latin. I didn't know that. So someone in the Vatican.
We don't know. Yeah, we don't. It just appears in Latin, Latin, Spanish, and English.
Well, then, and obviously there's Vatican involvement. The fraternity didn't do its own Latin translation. So this has, for better or worse, from the perspective of the modernists, an official status, especially if there's an official Latin translation. You'll see if it appears in the AAS.
Yes, the official publication of the Pope's Acts.
Yeah.
Although, again, the other part about this is interesting. Is we're not political, as you said. We're not a political party. But in some ways, this Pope is very political. I mean, very much when you see this, everything's personal. It makes it everything is political. And one thing he may seem to like is to keep his own people in the Vatican guessing of what he's doing. We've had lots of reports out this pontificate. If people are not sure, there's different versions of this document, different leaks. That almost his game is to, he tells people to go do something, but then may do something over here in the Vatican to keep them off their guard. I mean, is that maybe a human explanation for what he's doing?
Yeah, I'm not sure how it fits in with his overall modernist agenda, which is, as he said himself during the synod on synodality, not a new church, but a different church. Well, whatever that means, whatever it means, it's not good. So again, we have this drift in a modernist or neo-modernist direction, but we have the little concessions he makes if you get in a room with him and have a chat. So I suggest that the fraternity have more chats, as many as possible. Maybe we can get concessions for the wider church, and the society is just chugging
along. Right.
So there doesn't seem to be a problem with the traditionalist orders, except if you get a hostile local ordinary.
Right.
A strict interpretation of Traditionis Custodes and shut them down. But where has it really happened? I think only in Chicago, right? As far as I know.
Well, in the United States, that's the most blatant example. Chicago is supage shutting it down.
Regular St. John Cantius, they were forbidden to offer the mass.
Yes.
The Triduum.
The first Sunday of every month. There was a logical one.
The first Sunday of every month.
Right. The point you mentioned about the society is kind of another interesting, aspect of this. So he issues Traditionis Custodes, and then his liturgical henchman, Archbishop Roche, says no more sacraments in the old rite. But again, this is the Pope, as you pointed out, who's given permission, faculties, and made all the legal niceties dotted, that says Society of St. Pius X can hear confessions, can celebrate the old, and everybody knows in the Vatican, I'm sure the Pope knows, there's no way they're celebrating the new sacraments, right? That's unthinkable. But he tells them they can have marriages and they can have, confessions. And you get this sort of almost just illogical, again, inconsistent thinking. Well, I want to stop that. Oh, but I let them. Oh, I'm not going to worry about tying up that loose end. That sort of, and maybe that gets to your point about his modernist agenda. If much of modernism is to throw us all off, and there is no consistency of principles, that there is no objectivity, then maybe that is a part of it.
Well, it reminds you of the Mitre and the Crook.
Yes, a great book. Yes.
The unscrupulous bishop who ends up being the paladin of a liturgical restoration in spite of himself. So that's what's possibly happening here. I mean, the Holy Ghost writes straight with crooked lines, as the cliche goes, and this is a crooked line. He's bobbing and weaving. giving personal concessions that contradict his apparent will in Traditionis, Custodes. But, that maybe the Holy Ghost is influencing it. And he is, after all, the occupant of the See of Peter. And there could be some graces being conferred upon him at this very moment. I mean, I know I pray for the Holy Father in the Rosary. I'm not one of these people who says he's lost his seat. That's for a future Pope or Council to judge, and may never happen. So, again, maybe we see the Holy Ghost at work here.
Perhaps. Well, if we can transition then maybe from a confusing situation in the church to an even more sort of head-scratching situation in Eastern Europe. As I'm sure our viewers are aware, in recent days, the country of Russia has launched some kind of military operation against Ukraine. Here's kind of a recent map from website. So the Ukraine is situated here, just sort of southwest of Russia. It is right on the edge of other Eastern European countries, Romania, Hungary, just a little bit there off the map. This used to be part of the Soviet Union at one point in history. When the Soviet Union broke apart, several of the Soviets, or equivalents of kind of states within the Soviet Union, became their own countries. And so we saw this sort of interesting action this week. We're wondering, kind of, as Catholics, what do we make of all this? I mean, the mainstream media, those in the elites, want to turn this into a clear fairy tale where Ukraine is the heroine, the sort of without blemish Snow White, and Russia is the evil empire of Ronald Reagan's day, right? Is the bad evil wizard who is must be stopped at all costs. Are these caricatures logical? Is that how Catholics should approach this, or what do you make of this situation?
Well, if you're looking at just war theory, I don't really think the invasion could be justified as a just war. On the other hand, I don't want to fall into the fallacy of tu quoque. You do too. But what we have here, and I'm writing a piece on this for the Remnant, is what I call an American rules invasion.
Yes.
Under the American rule, which has been applied again and again, most notably with Iraq, if you want regime change, you invade the country, demolish its infrastructure, destroy everything in your path, and install a new government. We did that in Iraq, a nation with whom we had no quarrel, which has already been crippled by sanctions for a dozen years. We rolled in there, destroyed the whole country, and the situation there is infinitely worse than it was before we got rid of Saddam Hussein. That made no sense whatsoever. So that was an unjust war. Putin, with his aggression in Ukraine, at least is doing something that makes geopolitical sense. He fears the prospect of Ukraine becoming a NATO nation, which would mean military bases and perhaps nuclear missiles on the Russian border. So it makes geopolitical sense. Do I justify the invasion? No, I do not. But do I say it's a question of Putin acting in a way that is contrary to the norms that have been established in these situations by the United States itself? No, I do not. Again and again, the United States has resorted to bombing, invasions, and also fomenting revolutions to get what it wants in the Middle East with catastrophic results. So it's an American rules invasion. But at least this invasion makes some sense, as opposed to what we did in Iraq and what we did to assist the Saudis in Yemen, and the assassination of Muammar Gaddafi, which caused a humanitarian crisis that still exists in Libya. None of our moves in the Middle East have made the least bit of sense. We have wasted $7 trillion. We've lost 7,000 soldiers. Countless more have been maimed for life, not only for nothing, but for vastly worse than nothing. So who are we to sit in judgment of Putin? Now, having said that, it looks to me like this could end up being a total debacle for him. I think he's running into resistance he didn't count upon. You can't really trust what's coming out of the state media, meaning CNN and all the other networks, because they just parrot the line of the Democrat Party, now in control of the government. So a lot of what we read is probably nonsense. But it seems to me that his offensive is ground to a halt. If he doesn't succeed in capturing Kiev, this thing could blow up in his face. He could be removed. He could be poisoned. Anything could happen in Russia now. But thank God we don't see anyone taking seriously the calls for a no-fly zone over Ukraine. That would be World War III. Shooting down Russian planes to enforce a no-fly zone. it would be United States aircraft and United States pilots that would be shooting down the Russian planes. Thank God that's not going to happen. So this may just be something that grinds to a halt. It may turn into a slog. He may have to withdraw, or they may reach some sort of a settlement during these peace talks they're having. There could be a ceasefire. But why did he do it? He did it because he feared that the installation of Zelensky, following the so-called revolution of dignity, will result in a puppet state of the West. And what is Zelensky? He's no democratic ruler. He has silenced the opposition press. His political opponent is in jail. And the
kind of like Justin Trudeau in Canada. Oh, sorry. Yeah. I just had to.
And this guy is an absolute sicko. Yeah. You have to see some of the things he did when he was a comedian and an actor on TV. He did some skits that are so unspeakably obscene, I can't even describe them. The man is a degenerate. And his wife, Oleana, has caused the Ukraine to join the Biarritz Partnership for Women's Rights, emanating from France. All the G7 nations signed it. I think Ukraine at the time, when it joined in September 2020, was one of only 6 nations outside the G7 that signed on to this partnership. And the advisory committee for the partnership recommends rigorous enforcement of sexual and reproductive rights for schoolgirls. So this is what we're talking about. A clown who is now the president of Ukraine, whose history includes absolutely obscene and disgusting performances on television, and his women's lib wife, who has hooked up the nation of Ukraine to this Western initiative of women's rights, including sexual and reproductive rights. And, look at a speech that Putin gave last October, in which he talks about, and if his name wasn't on it, we'd all be cheering this speech. He talks about the catastrophic decline of the West, its descent into total depravity, its denial of the difference between men and women, its attack on the family, its attempt to erase its own history, its attempt to take racial equality, which is a noble goal, and turn it into what he calls a phantasmagoria, an absolute absurdity in which now we have reverse discrimination. It's a total attack on the cultural decline of the West. And if the Pope read it, Catholics the world over would be cheering that speech. But it was Putin who read it. Right. A gathering of journalists and intellectuals, a discussion group last October. So there's a lot going on here. I don't know what his motives are, but what he professes to fear is the Westernization, which is to say the terminal moral decline of Russia, which seems to be undergoing something of a moral rejuvenation, even if it isn't the promised conversion of Russia. There's some defense of traditional values, which is not to say that abortion has gone in Russia or that divorce has gone in Russia. But he's somewhat in a position of standing against the tide of cultural revolution and utter depravity that we now see in the United States. I mean, boys competing with women in sports.
Yeah.
Men pretending to be women, eclipsing all of the records in women's swimming, and we're supposed to cheer this? I mean, it's at this point a war on being itself, and Putin noted this too. A war on the difference between the sexes. So there's a lot going on here, and at least on paper, what he says is understandable as a motive for what he's doing, even if it can't justify aggression, which results in the death of civilians. I'm sorry, I just don't see how you can justify it under the just war theory.
No, particularly when he's not been attacked and he's just jumping forward and claiming for other reasons he wants to do it. It's definitely problematic, but as you say, it makes more natural sense, unlike, but he doesn't seem to have at least even learned the lessons of the U.S. in their, do as I say, not as I do, don't copy me. But even when they do it, look at Afghanistan, look at Iraq, we do and do these invasions, these regime changes, and then end up having everything go worse than it was before. Look at Afghanistan.
Following the American rule.
Yes.
I mean, how can America condemn his invasion of Ukraine, which at least makes geopolitical sense, when we conducted one senseless occupation of country after country
after another
in the Middle East and turned the whole thing into a quagmire? Afghanistan, more than 20 years. 20 years we spent there trying to turn it into a replica of Delaware, as Pat Buchanan puts it. And then we turned tail and ran and left the place worse off than it was before.
Yes.
Again and again, we've repeated this example of failure in the Middle East, and we just throw our weight around. We bomb whatever we please. and we destroy whatever we please. Iraq being the most prominent example, but Afghanistan also. So on what moral ground do we stand to condemn what Putin is doing?
Yes, I get it. Much hypocrisy. Yeah,
it's hypocrisy at best, even though, again, we don't want to fall into the fallacy of tu quoque. Well, you did it, so I can do it.
Right. Now, but as a Catholic, what's interesting about where this is going on, where it really does get our attention. Right? As an American who might say, look, it's not our fight. We're not really involved directly. But as a Catholic, we know Russia has some important role to play. Our Lady asked, not that any country or that the world, but that Russia in particular be consecrated and that Russia would be converted, right? Not that, Germany be converted or Afghanistan, but Russia in particular. So we know it must play some important role. On top of it, Ukraine is very important from a Catholic perspective because, as our viewers may know, most of these countries are religiously Christian, but Christians that have separated from the Catholic Church. They are schismatic Orthodox, but Ukraine is very unique in that, unlike other countries in Eastern Europe and Russia, a large group over the past couple hundred years have come back to the Catholic Church, and there are rather, a vibrant Ukrainian Catholic in the fullest sense, in union with the church community, many of whom may be, caught in this crossfire. But interestingly, there's been several reports the past few days that the Ukrainian bishops spoke with Pope Francis and actually said, we and the schismatic Orthodox bishops over there would like you to consecrate Russia to the Immaculate Heart to get us out of this mess. Yeah, well, it's unclear if it's happened. There's been at least reports that Pope Francis, we know, talked to one of the Ukrainian bishops. And there are reports that this issue was raised with Pope Francis. And again, we can't confirm that. We don't know for sure. But there's at least some talk of that in various internet news channels that the topic was raised. So again, maybe linked to our first story, it may not be out of the realm of possibility for this Pope, who sort of likes to be the Pope of surprises, if asked, that maybe he might do something like this. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, here again, the Holy Ghost might intervene and prompt him to do something.
Yes.
Again, he's erratic.
Yes.
The overall direction is always the same, but he's erratic, and you can expect some surprises from him. And every once in a while, there's an eruption of orthodoxy in what he says. So, occasionally he says something that's quite true. For example, his condemnation of internet addiction, his critique of hypercapitalism, which goes too far, but in essence, it's correct. The church does not support the idea that the free market determines justice with nothing more than price setting by the market. So some of the things he says are corresponding to orthodoxy, and some of his gestures are in service of tradition, perhaps in spite of himself, perhaps because of the influence of the Holy Ghost. And maybe we'll see that here with the consecration of Russia. Remember at the beginning of his pontificate, when I was optimistic about him?
Yes.
I don't have an axe to grind, by the way. There's a video out there somewhere with me and Father Gruner extolling him as someone who is apparently Marian in orientation. And then I wrote a column a couple of days later saying, will this be the Pope who does the consecration of Russia? Because the first thing he asked for was the bishops of Portugal to consecrate their country to the Immaculate Heart. And they did that, I believe.
Yes. Well, here's actually one report. This is just from today, and now it's hitting more mainstream. This is Catholic News Agency. It says bishops ask Pope Francis to consecrate Ukraine and Russia to Immaculate Heart of Mary.
Oh, well, that's it then.
Yeah. And it just refers here to Ukrainian Latin Rite Catholic bishops in a letter to the Pope. And again, here seems to be, again, a report, a copy of the letter
because I think it's a timely request, and it's going to be difficult for those who say Russia has converted, the consecration has been done, to fit into that narrative, this invasion, which, again, even if it's geopolitically understandable and is following the American rule of bomb and destroy whatever you want to change, even though it follows the American rule, how can it be justified as an example of Russia's conversion?
Yeah, exactly.
A lot of innocent people are going to die.
Yes.
No question about that, because the convoy is stalling, and now he has to really think about doing what America does when it invades a nation. Destroy the infrastructure, blow up the bridges, take out the electrical grid, really make people suffer. Now, let's not forget that the Americans, in their activities in Iraq, inflicted a death toll at least 500,000 in number, when you count both the direct casualties from the invasion and the use of weaponry and the destruction of the infrastructure, starvation, disease, and so forth. And that's a conservative estimate. And then, of course, the Christians, 80% of them have fled Iraq because of what we did. So let's keep this in perspective. And, before we point the finger of blame at Putin, well, let's take the beam out of America's eye first.
Well said. Well said. And very, very much to that narrative being, defeated, Our Lady made a promise to us that if Russia were consecrated according to her requirements, a period of peace would be given to the world. Well, no matter what date you pick for the alleged consecration, and this incident, as you say, just proves it, where's our period of peace? If Russia's been converted, we should be at peace. And instead, we see Russia invading a neighbor country. So clearly, the consecration has not occurred, and it's really the last hope of humanity to get us out of the mess our world's in.
Yeah, I think we should tie this up with a bow, though, because Pat Buchanan wrote a really good piece on this. And he basically said that what Putin is doing is exactly what the United States wants him to do. We deliberately provoke this. We deliberately provoked it with the color revolutions, in which democratically elected leaders were overthrown in favor of more pro-Western candidates for the office. In fact, that's what happened in 2014 when the duly elected president of Ukraine was toppled. And that was his second run for office.
Yes.
The 2010 election was annulled. He ran again in 2014. International observers said it was a fair election, but we couldn't tolerate that. So we had the Revolution of Dignity, and Yushchenko had to flee the country. And so we ended up with a series we had an interim president, then another term of 5 years, I think it was Poroshenko, and then we got this character Zelensky, all to the liking of the West. So we have to bear in mind that this is a policy that the United States has been pursuing, using Ukraine as a pawn to provoke Russia into doing exactly what Russia is doing. So we can't discount the role of the United States foreign policy in causing yet another debacle in the Middle East and Eurasia.
Well, there you have it. That's our view of church and state this week as we go into the first week of Lent. I thank you for listening to us. We'll be back in 2 weeks with another story of where we are. In the meantime, wish you, Chris, and everyone a holy Lent and a spiritually prosperous Lent.
And you too, Brian. Thanks. God bless. Until next time.